The morning of March 24, 1945, found the Combat Information Center of USS Bush alive with activity. Northwest of Okinawa, the glowing phosphorescent sweep of the SG surface search radar painted ghostly echoes across the darkened screen. Radar operator James Patterson, second class, fine-tuned the gain control as another sweep refreshed the display before him. Multiple contacts were appearing, bearing 340 degrees, range 62 miles, and he counted them quickly. 50-plus aircraft, maybe more, inbound from a direction the men had come to call Kyushu. Commander Rollin Westholme reached for the TBS radio handset, his movements deliberate and calm. Task Force 58 had established 16 radar picket stations in a defensive ring around Okinawa, creating what amounted to an electronic fence that no Japanese aircraft could hope to slip through undetected. It was a technological marvel, the kind of advantage that should have given the men confidence. What none of them realized in that moment was that this very advantage would ignite the fiercest and most relentless aerial assault in naval history. The Imperial Japanese Navy's Kamikaze Special Attack Units had spent months in preparation for exactly this purpose: to break through American defenses and offer up their lives in exchange for enemy warships. The radar picket destroyers stood directly in their path, the first obstacle between the kamikaze formations and the invasion fleet at Okinawa. The mathematics of their strategy was merciless and simple: one pilot, one plane, one ship. The Pacific War had fundamentally transformed American destroyers. They were no longer hunters of submarines prowling beneath the waves. They had become electronic sentinels, watching the sky, feeding information to the fleet. Each radar picket station circled at distances between 15 and 95 miles from Point Bolo, that designated reference point on Okinawa's Zampa Misaki Peninsula. 7 stations were already operational by April 1st, with 9 more activated as the campaign intensified. The USS Laffey steamed through the Pacific swells at 15 knots, her Allen M. Sumner-class hull displacing 2,200 tons of seawater. Every inch of her was designed and equipped for one mission alone. Commander Frederick Julian Beckton stood in the Combat Information Center, his eyes studying the radar repeater scope with intensity. His ship carried 336 men and an arsenal of anti-aircraft weapons configured with one purpose in mind: destroying aircraft. 6 5-inch dual-purpose guns in twin mounts sat ready. 12 40mm Bofors spread across quad and twin mounts. 11 20mm Oerlikon cannons positioned throughout her frame. The latest fire control radars were mounted across the vessel. The Mark 37 gun director paired with Mark 25 fire control radar, systems that would make history before this day ended. The Combat Information Center represented American technology at its most refined and complex. This was nothing like the primitive radar plotting rooms of 1942. The CIC integrated multiple radar systems into a unified tactical display that gave the defenders an almost supernatural awareness of the battle space. Air search radar could see beyond 60 miles. Surface search radar painted the ocean out to 15 miles. Height-finding equipment could calculate aircraft altitude for fighter interception. Fighter direction circuits connected this destroyer directly to combat air patrols flying overhead, creating a web of communication and coordination. The mathematics were genuinely revolutionary. Traditional visual gunnery against maneuvering aircraft achieved hit rates below 2%. Radar-directed fire control pushed accuracy up to 20% under ideal conditions. Add proximity-fused shells that detonated near targets without requiring direct contact, and the defensive firepower became exponentially more lethal. Yet even this advanced technology had limits. Lieutenant Howell Chickering commanded landing craft support Large 51, one of the gunboats assigned to support the radar pickets. His assessment was direct and accurate. The destroyers were bait, deliberately positioned to draw enemy attacks away from the main fleet. The strategy was cold and calculated: attract the kamikazes to the pickets, vector in fighter coverage overhead, destroy them before they could reach the carriers and transports. Meanwhile, at the training base at Kanoya Airfield, Lieutenant Yukio Seki reviewed the attack orders with the pilots under his command. The men of the 201st Air Group were preparing for Operation Kikusui No. 1, the floating chrysanthemum operation. 355 kamikaze aircraft and 341 conventional bombers would strike the American fleet in coordinated waves. The youngest pilot among them was only 17 years old. Their training had been compressed into mere days. 7 days total to learn how to fly and identify ship types. 2 days of takeoff practice. 2 days of formation flying. 3 days of approaching and attacking a target. Navigation training was minimal at best. The escorts would guide them to the target area. Maneuvering in combat was irrelevant to their mission. They needed only the ability to aim and dive. Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi had organized the first official kamikaze unit back in October 1944. Lieutenant Yukio Seki had led that first successful attack, sinking USS St. Lo on October 25, 1944, transforming what had been spontaneous acts into systematic strategy. The pilots understood American radar capabilities better than most of their own commanders seemed to realize. The destroyers positioned around Okinawa were far more than early warning stations. They controlled fighter aircraft capable of intercepting attacking formations 50 miles from the fleet. But the radar pickets carried a critical vulnerability. They operated in isolation, 30 to 60 miles from any mutual support, unable to concentrate their defensive firepower. A determined mass attack could overwhelm an individual destroyer before help arrived from the main task force. The mathematics of kamikaze strategy were simple and brutal. If 1 in every 6 kamikaze aircraft struck their targets, the exchange rate favored Japan. 1 pilot and 1 obsolete aircraft traded for hundreds of American sailors and a $1 million warship. It was an equation the Japanese High Command had embraced. The American ships formed their defensive perimeter as dawn approached on April 6, 1945. Each picket station maintained a 5,000-yard patrol radius, with a destroyer at the center and 2 to 4 support craft positioned in diamond formation, maintaining 15 knots and reversing course every 30 minutes to complicate submarine targeting. The new radar systems had transformed naval warfare into something entirely new, an electronic battlefield. The SC-2 air search radar swept the skies every 4 seconds. The SG surface search maintained continuous coverage of the ocean surface. Mark 12 and Mark 22 fire control radars locked onto individual targets for precision gunnery. SP height-finding radar calculated aircraft altitudes for fighter interception. Combat Air Patrol maintained constant watchfulness, but the distances were enormous. Only 2 F-6F Hellcats, or F-4U Corsairs per station during daylight hours. Response time from the carriers to the outer picket stations stretched to 20 to 30 minutes under the best conditions. Those minutes would determine who lived and who died. At 0300 on April 6, radar operators across the entire picket line detected the first wave of Kikusui No. 1. Multiple raids approaching from the northwest. The tactical plot displayed over 100 contacts converging on the radar picket stations. Fighter Direction Officer Lieutenant Frank Adams vectored his combat air patrol to intercept. 2 Corsairs against 30-plus kamikazes. The mathematics were impossible. The kamikaze formation had already begun their descent toward wave-top height, using the radar horizon to mask their final approach vector. On Destroyer Bush at Radar Picket Station No. 1, the CIC team tracked incoming raids from multiple directions. Raid 1, 40 aircraft bearing 340 degrees. Raid 2, 20-plus bearing 015 degrees. Raid 3, composition unknown, bearing 285 degrees. Commander Westholm had trained his gun crews intensively for this exact moment. Continuous tracking of assigned targets. Fire when aircraft reached 12,000 yards, regardless of how perfect the firing solution was. Maintain maximum rate of fire until the target was destroyed or passed overhead. There would be no check fire. There would be no hesitation. Anything approaching the picket line was hostile. The ordeal of USS Bush began at 1500 hours. After shooting down 2 approaching aircraft, a Nakajima B-6N torpedo bomber broke through the defensive fire. The kamikaze struck between the 2 stacks on the starboard side, its bomb detonating in the forward engine room. Steam erupted through ruptured lines. 14 men died instantly, but Bush remained afloat, her damage control teams fighting fires while gunners continued engaging incoming aircraft without pause. At 1700, destroyer Colquhoun maneuvered to assist Bush, bringing 4 cap fighters with her. What followed was sheer aerial chaos as 40 to 50 Japanese aircraft swarmed over the 2 destroyers. Colquhoun took her first hit at 1730, a Zero crashing into her main deck. 3 more kamikazes struck in rapid succession. Commander George Wilson ordered abandon ship as Colquhoun broke apart and sank. 35 of her crew were lost. Bush continued fighting despite severe damage, threatening to tear her apart. At 1725, a second kamikaze crashed into her port side between the stacks. The explosion nearly severed the ship's hull. At 1745, a third kamikaze struck the port side above the main deck. Ammunition began exploding, fires spread beyond control. At 1830, Bush rolled over and sank. 87 of her 307-man crew were lost, including members of Commander James Willis's staff, who had been aboard as Commander Destroyer Division 48. The survivors spent up to 10 hours in the water before rescue arrived. LCSL 64 was first on scene at 21:30, pulling exhausted men from oil-covered waters while facing the continuing threat of air attack. The mathematics of April 6th were staggering. In a single day, kamikazes sank destroyers Bush, Colquhoun, and Emmons, plus destroyer minesweeper Emmons and 2 ammunition ships. 10 other ships suffered damage. Yet the radar pickets had fulfilled their mission. The main fleet at Hagushi anchorage remained largely untouched. The destroyers had absorbed the fury that was meant for the invasion force. USS Laffey arrived at Radar Picket Station No. 1 on April 15, 1945, relieving destroyer J. William Ditter. Commander Beckton reviewed the tactical situation with his department heads. The Japanese had shifted their tactics following the initial assaults. Now came small groups infiltrating at dawn and dusk, individual aircraft using cloud cover and rain squalls for concealment, coordinated attacks from multiple directions designed to overwhelm the fire control systems. The Laffey had survived kamikaze attacks at Lingayen Gulf and Iwo Jima, but Okinawa was different. The proximity to Japanese airfields on Kyushu meant near-continuous attacks with no respite, no safe periods. General quarters from dawn to dusk, and often through the night. The men lived in constant readiness. On April 16th, the situation developed exactly as Beckton had anticipated. At 0727, radar contact, a single aircraft bearing 020 degrees, range 11 miles. The aircraft approached at wave-top height, using the morning sun for concealment. Beckton ordered hard right rudder and flank speed. The destroyer heeled sharply as she accelerated past 30 knots. The aircraft pilot adjusted his approach angle, aiming for the bridge. Range decreased to 2,000 yards. All starboard guns opened fire. The aircraft absorbed dozens of hits but kept coming. At 500 yards, a 5-inch shell detonated directly beneath the valve. The explosion tore off the left wing and sent the fuselage cartwheeling into the sea, 50 yards from Laffey's hull. But this was only the beginning. At 0800, CIC reported multiple raids converging on Station 1, estimated 50 aircraft in separate groups. CAP was engaging, but heavily outnumbered. What followed was 80 minutes of the most intense combat in destroyer history. 22 kamikaze aircraft would attack Laffey individually and in groups. The first 8 were destroyed by devastatingly accurate gunfire. The gun crews had developed a rhythm: track approaching aircraft, concentrate fire from multiple mounts, maintain continuous fire regardless of hits observed, switch to new target immediately upon splash, no celebration, no pause. The next aircraft was always seconds away. At 0827, the 9th kamikaze overwhelmed the defensive fire, a Yokosuka D4Y Judy approaching from astern where fewer guns could bear. Despite taking multiple 40mm and 20mm hits, the aircraft struck gun mount 53, the after 5-inch mount. The explosion killed 6 men instantly, including the mount captain and gunner's mate, First Class Lawrence Delowski, who had been directing the mount in local control. Fires erupted across the fantail. Ammunition began cooking off. Mount 53 was destroyed. 1/6 of Laffy's heavy firepower eliminated in a single moment. The 10th kamikaze struck minutes later. Another Judy attacking from the port quarter crashed into the afterdeck house, destroying two 20mm mounts and their crews. The fires spread toward the after magazine. Damage control parties fought desperately to contain the flames, while gunners continued engaging new attackers with relentless determination. The 11th attacker, a Val, dropped a bomb that struck between the stacks, penetrating two compartments before exploding in the machine shop. The blast ruptured steam lines and knocked out electrical power aft. Gun mounts 42 and 43 lost power and had to be operated manually. Rate of fire dropped dramatically. At 0900, Laffy faced her most desperate moment. 4 kamikazes attacked simultaneously from different directions. The overwhelmed fire control system could only track 2. The first, a Val, crashed into a gun mount. The second struck the port side near the waterline. The third dropped a bomb that exploded in the after engine room. The fourth was destroyed 100 yards from the ship by desperate close-range fire from a 20mm mount, whose gunner, Seaman Alphonse Tides, remained at his position despite shrapnel wounds tearing into his body. Laffy was burning from bridge to stern, her rudder jammed hard left, forcing the ship into a continuous circle. Speed reduced to 8 knots. 1/3 of her crew were casualties. The forward gun batteries were in terrible shape. 6 of the mounts lay twisted and useless or severely damaged. Commander Beckton himself bore the scars of the assault. Reports flooded in from every section of the ship, each one detailing fresh devastation. Yet the situation, while grave, wasn't entirely lost. The forward guns that remained operational could still deliver firepower. Damage control teams worked frantically to contain the spreading infernos that consumed the vessel. Somehow, miraculously, the ship stayed afloat despite the overwhelming punishment it had absorbed. When Lieutenant Frank Manson, the assistant communications officer, approached Commander Beckton with a question about abandoning ship, the commander's answer would echo through naval history. "No," he said with absolute conviction. "I'll never abandon ship as long as a single gun will fire." A lookout standing nearby added quietly, "And if I can find one man to fire it." 4 more kamikazes swept toward them over the next 20 minutes. The gunners who could still man their stations destroyed 3 of the attackers. The 4th plane, a Zero laden with a 500-pound bomb, descended directly toward the forward stack and struck with tremendous force. The explosion sent shockwaves through the entire vessel. The bridge structure was lifted bodily into the air, then slammed downward with bone-crushing violence. Everyone in the Combat Information Center was knocked senseless by the impact. When consciousness slowly returned, the compartment filled with choking, acrid smoke that made breathing nearly impossible. The radar scopes went dark. Critical systems flickered and died. For those agonizing first minutes, the ship had lost its electronic eyes and voice. LaFay was blind and unable to communicate with the rest of the task force. The 20th kamikaze bore down through this chaos. Without radar to track it or any coordinated defense system, individual gun crews had to rely on their own initiative and skill. Gunners braced themselves and prepared to engage whatever emerged from the smoke. First-class gunner's mate Robert Carr stood at Mount 44. His eyes suddenly caught movement through the chaos, a Zero diving from 8,000 feet, descending at tremendous speed. Though his mount was operating in manual mode without automatic tracking systems, Carr's crew kept pace with the plummeting aircraft and poured continuous fire into its fuselage. The enemy plane erupted in a ball of flame 500 feet above the water. Debris rained down across the forward deck like deadly hail. Moments later, the 21st kamikaze emerged from the thick smoke surrounding LaFay's burning superstructure. It was a Kate, a torpedo bomber, moving at wave height and aimed directly at the forward magazine. Seaman Foutridge, manning a 20mm position during damage control, caught sight of the aircraft suddenly appearing from the smoke just 400 yards away. His fingers found the trigger, and he unleashed a sustained burst of tracer rounds, walking the fire directly into the Kate's engine compartment. The aircraft shuddered and lurched nose downward. It crashed into the sea 30 yards from LaFay's port side. The massive explosion that followed sent a tremendous spray of seawater across the burning destroyer, and the deluge helped extinguish some of the fires consuming the vessel. By 0947 hours, the 22nd and final kamikaze approached the stricken destroyer. Le Fay had endured continuous attack for 80 straight minutes. The crew was utterly exhausted, their ammunition supplies running dangerously low, and defensive firepower had been reduced by 70%. Yet throughout this ordeal, the gunboat LCS L-51 had remained alongside Le Fay, fighting with every weapon it possessed. Lieutenant Chickalong of the LCS L-51 ordered maximum speed and deliberately positioned his smaller vessel between the incoming kamikaze and the destroyer. The enemy pilot faced an immediate choice: continue toward the more valuable destroyer or accept the lesser target directly before him. In that critical moment, he chose to attack Le Fay. The kamikaze passed 50 feet above the gunboat, its fixed landing gear nearly clipping the mast as it flashed overhead. Chickalong's gunners unleashed intense fire at the aircraft's exposed belly. The Zero began trailing smoke, then flame. It crashed into the ocean 100 yards from Le Fay's side. The battle was finally over. In 80 minutes, Le Fay had endured 22 separate kamikaze attacks. 6 aircraft had struck the ship directly, and 4 bombs had detonated on or near the vessel. 32 sailors lay dead, and 71 others carried wounds that would mark them for life. Yet the ship remained afloat, a seemingly impossible survival. The real story, however, lived in the numbers. Le Fay's gunners had fired more than 8,000 rounds of ammunition during the engagement. They had destroyed 9 kamikazes with direct gunfire and damaged 4 additional aircraft so severely that they either crashed short or veered off target. The fire control radar had maintained accurate tracking solutions despite devastating battle damage. The proximity fuses had dramatically increased the effectiveness of the defensive fire. The Combat Information Center had orchestrated the defense even when partially crippled. It was a perfect marriage of technology and training, defeating suicide tactics. The radar picket system defending Okinawa represented something profound, a fundamental transformation in how naval warfare would be fought forever. Electronic detection and fire control had become more important than armor thickness or engine speed. The destroyers positioned around Okinawa were far more than scouts. They functioned as command and control platforms, managing a 3-dimensional battle space that extended 60 miles horizontally and reached 30,000 feet vertically. Fighter direction teams stationed aboard these destroyers had revolutionized air defense itself. During the campaign at Okinawa, these teams had controlled more than 5,000 fighter interceptions. Their coordinated efforts had resulted in the destruction of approximately 1,900 enemy aircraft before those planes could reach attack positions. The radar had seen what human eyes could never perceive, tracked what human minds could never process alone, and guided weapons toward targets in complete darkness, through weather, and across smoke-filled skies. Yet the human price extracted had been staggering beyond comprehension. Over the 82-day Okinawa campaign, the radar picket destroyers absorbed the full force of Japanese desperation. 15 destroyers and destroyer minesweepers were sunk while on radar picket duty. 45 more were damaged. Over 4,900 sailors were killed or wounded at these picket stations alone. The destroyers had fulfilled their sacred mission as electronic sentinels while simultaneously serving as magnets for enemy attacks. They protected the main battle fleet by sacrificing themselves. On May 4th, kamikaze attacks claimed 2 destroyers at radar picket station number 1. The Morrison sank in minutes after being struck by 4 aircraft in rapid succession. Of her 331 crew members, 152 were lost. The Luce followed moments later. The radar systems had tracked the incoming raids with perfect accuracy. The guns had fired without ceasing. The fire control officers had performed their duties with textbook precision. Yet when 40 aircraft attack a single destroyer, mathematics become destiny. When numbers are stacked that heavily against you, outcome becomes certain. Captain Rikihei Inaguchi, who had participated in developing kamikaze tactics, would later reflect on these radar picket battles. The American destroyers fought with remarkable courage, he wrote. Their radar gave them capabilities we never anticipated. They could see our aircraft assembling over our own airfields. They tracked us across hundreds of miles of ocean. Their fire control was devastating in its accuracy. Yet Inoguchi also made a critical observation. We believed the radar pickets were vulnerable because they operated in isolation. We were wrong. The radar connected them to a defensive network that spanned the entire fleet. When we attacked a single destroyer, we faced the coordinated defense of dozens of ships and hundreds of aircraft. The technological gap had become insurmountable. Japanese pilots flew aircraft that were growing obsolete, possessed minimal training, and faced radar-directed guns firing shells with proximity fuses. American fighters, vectored by shipboard controllers, intercepted raid formations 50 miles from their intended targets. Electronic warfare had replaced visual combat. The psychological impact on Japanese operations proved equally devastating. Pilots who expected to find scattered surprise targets instead encountered defenses that were precisely coordinated and mathematically calculated. Radar operators working in air-conditioned compartments tracked every approach from takeoff to impact. Fighter directors speaking calmly into radio handsets orchestrated destruction with meticulous precision. The age of the warrior had ended. The age of the technician had begun. By May 11th, Japanese naval commanders had begun modifying their tactics in response to the effectiveness of the radar pickets. Attacks would concentrate on stations where weather degraded radar performance. Aircraft would approach at low altitude, using terrain masking from nearby islands. They would dispense window, metallic strips designed to create false radar returns and confuse the electronic systems. Electronic warfare had evolved on both sides of the conflict, but the Americans continued improving their systems faster than the Japanese could develop countermeasures. New height-finding radars eliminated blind spots in vertical coverage. Improved identification systems prevented friendly fire incidents. Data links between ships allowed coordinated defense of multiple stations simultaneously. The technological advantage accelerated rather than diminished as weeks passed. The destroyer Henry W. Hadley at Picket Station 15 demonstrated the evolved defensive capability on May 11th. Under attack by more than 150 kamikaze and conventional aircraft in multiple waves, Hadley's Combat Information Center managed 6 separate radar plots while directing 12 fighter aircraft and coordinating gunfire with 3 supporting ships. The result was stunning. 23 enemy aircraft were destroyed. Hadley herself was severely damaged but remained afloat. 28 sailors were killed and 67 were wounded. Without radar, the outcome would have been total annihilation. Commander Mullaney, Hadley's commanding officer, would later provide crucial insight into the experience. Radar picket duty was like the infantry point man, he explained. You're out front alone and you get hit first. But unlike the infantry point man who can only see a few yards ahead, our radar gave us the eyes of an eagle. We could see death approaching from 50 miles away and prepare ourselves to meet it. The industrial implications were equally decisive in determining the war's outcome. American shipyards were producing new radar sets at rates exceeding 200 per month. Japanese aircraft production had fallen below 500 planes monthly. Most of outdated design, the mathematical equation was merciless and inexorable. American technology was advancing faster than Japanese pilots could be trained to counter it. Each destroyed kamikaze represented months of training investment that could never be replaced. Each damaged American destroyer that returned to service came back with improved equipment and crews seasoned by combat experience. The attrition warfare that Japanese commanders had calculated would exhaust American resolve instead demonstrated American industrial supremacy and capability. On June 22, 1945, organized Japanese resistance on Okinawa ended. The radar picket stations had been operational for 90 days. During that period, they had tracked thousands of air attacks, vectored fighters to intercept over 1,900 raids, and directly engaged approximately 600 kamikaze aircraft that penetrated to attack positions. The strategic implications transformed Pacific warfare fundamentally. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of the Japanese homeland, incorporated massive radar picket lines based directly on Okinawa experiences. Hundreds of destroyers equipped with the latest radar systems would create electronic barriers around invasion fleets. Fighter direction would be centralized in purpose-built command ships. The Japanese homeland would face not individual ship defenses, but integrated air defense networks spanning hundreds of miles. Admiral Matome Ugaki, commander of the 5th Air Fleet, made his final assessment before conducting his own kamikaze attack on August 15, 1945. "The American radar pickets have created an invisible wall around their forces," he wrote. "Our pilots crash against this wall like birds against glass. We see the target but cannot reach it. Technology has defeated spirit." The USS Lafay survived the war and served for another 3 decades, eventually becoming a museum ship where visitors could walk her decks and see where history changed. Her radar arrays, though primitive by modern standards, had represented a complete revolution in naval warfare. The ability to see beyond visual range, track multiple targets simultaneously, and direct weapons with mathematical precision had changed combat forever. Commander Beckton, reflecting on the radar picket experience, provided crucial insight into what the battle had really meant. "We proved at Okinawa that wars would no longer be won by the side with the bravest warriors or the greatest willingness to sacrifice. Wars would be won by the side with the best technology and the industrial capacity to produce it in overwhelming quantities." The radar picket destroyers were not just ships. They were the embodiment of American technical superiority. The human cost had been terrible. Nearly 5,000 American naval personnel had been killed or wounded on radar picket duty alone. Nearly 2,000 kamikaze sorties had been flown. Hundreds of young Japanese pilots had crashed into the sea, achieving nothing but their own deaths. Yet from this sacrifice emerged a new understanding of warfare that would shape all future conflicts. Electronic systems would determine future battles. Information superiority would prove more decisive than raw firepower. The ability to process and act on data faster than an opponent would become the ultimate weapon. The radar picket destroyers had not just defended against kamikaze attacks. They had demonstrated the future of warfare itself. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, dozens of destroyers rest on the ocean floor alongside hundreds of Japanese aircraft. Their crews are honored by both sides for the courage they displayed facing impossible odds. Yet their sacrifice marked something more than individual heroism. It marked the moment when technology became the dominant factor in warfare. Radar operators working in darkened compartments became more important than admirals standing on bridge wings. Mathematical calculations replaced warrior intuition as the foundation of tactics and strategy. The future belonged to nations capable of producing sophisticated electronics and training personnel to use them effectively. The radar picket destroyers of Okinawa had not just won a battle, they had revealed the nature of all future conflicts. The invisible electronic battlefield would determine victory. The nation with superior sensors, better processes, and effective data links would dominate. The age of electronic warfare had begun, written in the steel and blood of radar picket destroyers that stood between kamikazes and the American fleet. Their legacy lives not in their armor or guns, but in the radar arrays that gave them the power to see death approaching from tremendous distance and the technology to defeat it. They had changed warfare forever.